My name is Meena Khalili, and this micro lesson is really going to focus on how we might bring collaboration and critique to 2D art or visual design within the digital space at zero cost with a shallow learning curve. So, Miro is essentially an infinite whiteboard platform that can be used in remote and in person settings. And I want to emphasize that it can actually cross over for when we go back face to face. It encourages collaboration and participation among learners. And this micro lesson is going to touch on several best practices for setting up a Miro board for visual critique and workshops. So what you're going to be learning in this micro lesson, some objectives for this lesson. We're going to talk about what Miro is and what problems it solves. You'll hopefully gain a cursory understanding of the platform. I'd like to discuss best practices for setting up a Miro board for visual critique and workshops, how to apply for a free license as an educator, and any other possibilities for using Miro. I do have a couple. And a quick introduction to Miro. As I'd mentioned, it's an infinite whiteboard for collaboration, but it comes with preset templates, or you can make your own. It's incredibly customizable and has, like I mentioned, a very shallow learning curve compared to other platforms, which can be kind of confusing to onboard. It can be used for brainstorming, storyboarding, digital product prototyping, visual organization, polling, and so much more. I mean, you could really use this platform for any discipline that I could think of at a liberal arts university. One of my favorite ways to use this platform is for collaborative workshops, especially during what we're calling, among my friends, this eye-opening time, where most of us are working and learning remotely. These workshops have been noted by some of my students as sometimes the closest thing that they get to experiencing being back in the classroom. So some best practices that I'll go over. We'll start by talking about setting up the board. It's going to be important to see what this tool can do. I love using Miro for workshops, but there are a couple of different ways that you might go about setting up a workshop when working with visual ideas or communication. So the first method sort of sets up a board populated with what essentially serves as worksheets. The students are given a prompt or a directive at the top of the board. That's where my avatar is. I like to do that to sort of catch their eye. And this particular board has a UX exercise in it where students are developing user journeys based on children's nursery rhymes. The students have to identify the narrative arc of the nursery rhyme. And I came up with this because it's easy to remember a nursery rhyme. You pretty much know the narrative arc of it. But the students have to identify that narrative arc and then map out the user journey, which includes emotion and all sorts of things. So each board is actually outfitted with an arc and a journey map, as well as a series of sticky notes that the students can use to plot each point of the story. Each board also contains the various points in a narrative arc, as well as the nursery rhyme, so that students don't forget what those words are, because sometimes we need clarification or reminders. Students are then placed in teams and in breakout rooms to complete the workshop. Then we all get back together in the larger room and go over our findings. This is actually what this particular board looked like after the workshop. So you can see the students really did have quite a bit of fun drawing out their ideas while completing the task. And there was a lot of laughter surrounding this particular workshop because it is lighthearted. This type of board setup really lends itself to sort of a longer process that might be discussion based. And is great to tack on the end of a lecture to make sure that the students are hitting those objectives and really coming away with those learning points. So another method of visual workshopping that we might create really sets up an environment that's primed and ready for students to make right out of the gate. This is a board for a design advocacy poster collage workshop that I conducted with Nancy Skolos at Rhode Island School of Design just this past October. Our learners had signed up for this workshop, and there were really anything from students to professional designers to educators. And just like our students, they came ready to make and had a lot of energy surrounding the upcoming November election. Our goal was to meet these learners with enthusiasm where they were, head on, by preparing a bank of general assets at the top of the page. And they included mostly PNGs, which have transparent backgrounds and offer themselves really well to being layered for collage. We then set up a series of poster-sized frames, 4 per group, and a place where each group could copy and paste their desired assets from the top bank. The participants broke into groups and collaborated on a series of posters, and they were just so prolific because they were already set up with, and I'll actually go back to play this again, they were already set up with this bank of images. So they really were just like picking and choosing and assigning these images to certain ideas and concepts that they were just ready to create from. So we gave them some viewfinders as well, those black L-shaped brackets, to sort of crop, I quote, crop out their images, and a few quick reminders on the board as to the tools that were available in Miro. We had quite a few participants who were new to the platform and had minimal issue getting started. So they really showed us and confirmed that this particular platform has a very shallow learning curve. Both of these workshop methods that I've just shown you will come with me into the classroom once we return to face-to-face instruction. I was so happy with the results. So let's pivot just a little bit here and talk about Miro for peer feedback and critique. One hallmark of a 4-year BFA, which is the degree sought by most of my students, is live feedback and critique. But unfortunately, this is also something that educators across the board who've made the shift from face-to-face to remote learning across the nation really have noted as being extremely difficult to conduct in an online setting. So to meet this challenge head on in my Arts 102 course, which is comprised of students from all across the university at all levels, at all ages, I began critiquing early on using Miro. To do this, I would prepare boards with a number of frames, place student names on them, and then have them place their work near their name. Additionally, I would remind them of the project objectives by placing the project sheet directly on the board, just so that they could remember what their objectives were and what it was I was asking for. So students would gather in breakout rooms based on their boards and give each other feedback, both verbally and by posting little sticky notes with suggestions. And here are all of the students just sort of like moving around in the little breakout rooms and working on their individual boards. But I'll also mention, during this time of peer review and feedback, to make sure that you have directives for these comments that the students will be making to each other. If they're placing their comments or suggestions on sticky notes, make sure that you go over how to give that constructive critique before you unleash them into these rooms. So I like to give what I call QPS crits. They're question, praise, suggestions. So I'll ask students to give 3 sticky notes, one for each of those directives. One question for the student that they're reviewing, one bit of praise for the student that they're reviewing, and one suggestion for the work that they are reviewing. Finally, after a peer feedback session, I have found it to be very helpful to discuss one person's work from each board aloud to the group. So if that group picks one person to have their work discussed with the larger group, generally everybody in that board and in that course session will get some help from having that discussion about one person's work with the whole group. And so while I anticipate having large classroom feedbacks and critiques when we're face to face again, I fully expect to bring and to use this way of giving interim peer feedback in my classroom for the foreseeable future. This kind of collaborative tool has just been so, again, so helpful for the students. So lastly, I should mention that Miro can be used for more than workshopping and feedback. My colleagues and I have found it very helpful for project assessment and course planning as well. Here, what you're seeing is a board that shows a series of print posters handed in digitally and then organized by their success based on the rubric for the assignment, which is actually the small white text on the bottom right. These sticky notes give the point totals for the project, and then the projects are assessed and organized by their achievement based on the rubric. So this is just a visual organization tool, something that we would maybe do if we were collecting all of these printed posters by hand, and then sort of organizing and allocating points based on their success in the rubric. But you can still do that on a board such as this in Miro. And then this board, I love this personally, but this board displays a colleague's semester of lesson planning, like the full semester. So their class calendar is on the left, and each gray frame is broken up into all of the handouts, the lectures, the demos, everything needed for every project on the calendar. So as you can see, this platform has myriad uses, and while all the uses I've discussed today are crucial for remote instruction, they can also be integral to instruction in a physical classroom. So I love giving resources to people. So the QR codes here will take you to a product tour with a basic overview of Miro, as well as the application if you're interested in acquiring a Miro education license. The education license is free for you and your students and allows for infinite boards. And I'll always say, take a screenshot of things like this so you can use them later, because additionally, I've included some similar platforms that have educational plans that are free and support online collaboration as well. So while it seems like most companies of well-known digital products like Adobe and all of those have figured out how to support online collaboration, it can be really hard to know which ones are really any good. There are so many out there if you Google this. So I've been using all three of these similar platforms, Mural, Basecamp, and Figma, for over a year, for many, many years, and can attest not only to their efficacy, but also to their prevalence of use in the creative field at large. So what that means to me is that when a student graduates knowing how to use a project management platform like Basecamp or Figma, which is geared toward prototyping digital experiences, they make it clear to potential employers that they're already speaking the language of the practicing creative field.